to the Stracompio, GDG Inspires podcast, where we speak with leading experts in the field about trends, challenges, innovations shaping strategic communication today in the field of defense and security. My name is Giulia Dino Giacomelli, and I am the founder and chief consultant of GDG Inspire. This month, we are very proud to have with us Jared. He's the head of strategic communication for the Greater London Authority. Previously, he worked in several corporate settings to maximize the power of influential stories. But I will leave him to tell us what makes his job and his career quite exciting. So, Jared, welcome to the Stracompio, first of all.
Thank you very much for having me. This is wonderful.
Thank you. And yeah, I mean, as an icebreaker, we'd just like to know, I mean, how did you get your current position? I mean, what was your career development till here? And really, I mean, what makes it exciting?
I'm still shocked they hired me myself, but I can at least try and explain it. So I've been in communications in some form or another for 20 years. As you pointed out, most of it's been in the private sector working. I started in advertising and worked my way through lots of fascinating advertising agencies, working on everything from big global sneaker brands and tech brands to oven cleaner. I feel like everyone has an oven cleaner brand in their past, and maybe 10 years ago, almost by accident, I received a public sector brief, and it was actually for a campaign around adoption and fostering and helping children get out of care and into homes. And not that I was jaded or, anything like that, but suddenly that challenge was so much more interesting to me than all the sneakers and all the oven cleaners of the world. Like, what can I be doing to change people's behavior, to improve people's lives, to, as I've since learned, work with much smaller budgets and tighter parameters, but on work that I think is really meaningful. And that one sort of rogue brief really changed the direction of my life. And since then, I worked for specialist agencies working with government and NGOs and sort of public and third sector clients. And then a few years ago, I was scrolling LinkedIn, as one does when you're super cool like I am. And an ad popped up that was looking for someone to work for the Greater London Authority on their campaigns delivery. And like, I'm sorry to say, many Londoners, my first response was, who are these people? And what do they have to do with my life? But then I got really excited about the fact that, London has a marketing director. What is this? What is this role? And the more I learned about it, the more interesting it became. I was lucky enough to join the Greater London Authority. And then about a year and a half ago, we reshaped the team. So there was a sort of a campaigns and a delivery end, and then sort of a new refurbished, exciting Stratcoms team, which is yours truly and a crew of amazing experts around me. What's exciting, and I say this as someone that did start in the commercial sector, I had vowed never to go client side because, that's like the end of your career. Unless the conditions were met where it had infinite variety, it had, a real sense of positive meaning. It was making a real positive difference to the world, and it was personally interesting. Like, if I'm going to wake up and work 8, actually about 10 to 12 hours a day on a particular topic, that has to be something that means a lot to me, and I feel that is giving back to the world. And the idea of, well, the fact that I work on London and with London every day, which I think is genuinely the greatest city in the world, is has all of that, has the infinite variety, that sense of purpose, and that personal significance. I mean, I'm in it. I can touch London. Look, it's everywhere.
Yeah, and also I guess in your role, you don't only deal with the specific policy, right? It's quite an overarching role, and you can indeed touch upon different sides of what the city does in different fields. So, I mean, that also makes it quite diverse, and indeed exciting. So it's not just one field, but it's a bit of everything. In fact, my follow-up question is, I mean, where does it sit? I mean, your department, where does it sit in the kind of UK Stratcom architecture? And yeah, I mean, where does London City's capacity sit in it?
That's a very good question. So we, for those that don't know, which to be honest included me until about 2.5 years ago, how the sort of devolved authority works. London is 9 million people plus. It's divided into 33 boroughs, which are each the size of a small city in their own right. Several 100,000 people in each one, and each of those have their own local government that looks after them. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, of course, we have everything that's going on in Whitehall, and the national government departments, and ministries. We sit in between that as a devolved authority, and there are a few across Britain. We are a strategic regional authority, which means we're a bit of one and a bit of another. And we work to the Mayor of London, who is a directly elected um, politician, um, Sadiq Khan, obviously. And our job is to look at those issues and challenges that affect all Londoners. The local authorities are, doing an amazing job of taking care of the people in that particular area. We look at things that affect London as a whole. There's a team that look externally, talk about London sort of as a tourist destination or some place for business investment. Um, my role is more internal. I like to think of it as uh, looking after London's communication to Londoners. How we as Londoners, what we need to know, what we need to be doing, and how we can better progress.
Okay, so if I understand right, basically, whatever matter is better um, addressed at your level, it will be devolved to you, whereas competencies that are better addressed more at the local level, they will stay more.
Absolutely. And there's all sorts of um, legislative, I think, intricacies over what responsibilities lurk with what. We do a lot, as you can imagine, around things like transport and safety, the environment, things that are, air quality doesn't stop at, a particular street. Air quality is something that affects an entire city or beyond. Um, and then similarly, huge issues that affect Londoners, things like community cohesion or housing, access to green spaces. That involves a lot of work between all of those different levels. It's often well coordinated at a citywide level, but when it comes to the delivery, it requires local and uh, strategic authorities sort of working together really closely. And again, the government is very often um, they hold the purse strings, or there's national policy, or so um we work between all of the levels very carefully, and trying to make sure that everyone is aligned and working in partnership.
Indeed. And if you had to sum up, I mean, you mentioned some of them, but if you had to sum up the key areas of intervention where your service works, I mean, how would you cluster them?
That is a excellent question. And a huge part of the Stratcom's role is prioritizing. Our role, we're not gatekeepers, but our job is to understand, as you said, it's a huge and varied role. There are a lot of Londoners, there are a lot of messages, there are a lot of priorities. And what the Stratcoms team does is align those. And, with the understanding that Londoners have the attention, we have the resource. There's a limited number of messages that we can get out and a limited number of communications opportunities. So how do we maximize those to where we can be making the most impact most effectively? Um, and a lot of that is responsive to all the polling, to all of the community insight that we get, to making sure that we are talking about and intervening where Londoners want us to. We have the long-term priorities, which are those set out in the mayor's manifesto. We are he is elected based on a declared platform of deliverables, and so we need to make sure that those are being addressed and that Londoners understand what progress we're making against those. And then a lot of it is reactive. We are in a very fast-paced, almost terrifyingly uncertain world, and what Londoners um, care about or need to know about can change day by day, and we have to be responsive to those needs as well. But again, there are some consistencies. Delivery against housing. Londoners care a lot about the environment and all of that, and everything that means from air quality to green spaces. We care a lot about safety, is consistently one, and not just um, and all the nuances of that, from actual safety on the streets to violence against women and girls to hate crime to feeling uncomfortable or uncomfortable online. All of those are priorities for Londoners. And then looking ahead as well, there's a huge push to understand and create a positive environment for young people, to emphasize the opportunities that are available, the chances for growth, the chances for personal development, the um, keeping the city a wonderful place to grow up and grow old in. So all of that, I suppose, is a priority. I
Huge
like it.
portfolio.
It's that classic communications problem. I need one single-minded priority, and then I list about 25 things. But all of that.
No, and also, I mean, it's a huge portfolio, but then, I mean, London also has a great reputation of doing great campaigns. So there's also, I think, an expectation, right? That you not only you will do a lot of things, but you will also keep up with the standards. I mean, the whole world is looking at, what London campaigns look like, and they're always very innovative. Um, I mean, maybe you coming from the corporate world, you'd say they can be more innovative, but let's say in the public communication kind of field, it's renowned to be, very innovative, very original. So yeah, I mean, indeed, it's not just quant, but also qual that you have to kind of keep up. So I guess that's a lot. And you touched upon this, but I just want us to just dive in a bit more on that. So you said that in terms of priority setting, of course, there's, like the kind of bottom-up approach with, polling and insights from the ground, but also, of course, the political priorities of the mayor. How are you impacted by the national government priorities? To what extent, and like maybe you don't want to do, or you cannot, or you don't have really a ranking, but if you can give us perhaps examples also of when this happens.
The main thing is that everyone is looking out for the best interests of people, whether that's as a national citizen or a local citizen. And the bulk of communications from and policy interventions are under the iceberg stuff. Things that are non-controversial, that are just about trying to improve everyone's life on a day-to-day level. And it is about working together to sort of interpret and deliver those goals where we can. There are just from a pure communication standpoint, what you don't want to do is have multiple slightly conflicting campaigns running on the same topic. So whether that is violence against women and girls, or whether that is I I don't know, climate change or something like that, those are things that the national, local, regional government will all be communicating on all the time. So there's a strat comms challenge there, which is to make sure, like, look, all three of us have a campaign that we're really proud of. We've all got our insight that went into it. How do we work together to make sure that this is actually delivering against all of our goals, and we're not telling people three different things at a time? But that is that's a familiar problem that anyone that's ever worked in communications. Everyone's very proud of their own work, and everyone wants to make sure that it gets everywhere. Um, and that we coordinate very well with national government. I speak to my comms equivalents across various departments all the time to make sure that we are aligned. We work very well with the local councils. It's just making sure that everyone, as much as possible, is uh, I think aligned. We're all pointed in the same direction. It's just making sure that we're walking to the same beat, if you can forgive that terrible metaphor.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no, no. It makes total sense. And I mean, in the end, it's also a win-win. Because if everyone goes in a different direction, I mean, the effectiveness of the campaigns will be jeopardized for everyone. So that's not what I guess public services wants in the end. So it makes total sense. Um, in terms of indeed the way you implement your work and specifically the partnerships, what kind of partnerships do you think are needed um, for a city like London to deliver effective stratcoms?
I think this is a really, really broad point and a very, very good one. If you think about our modern media ecosystem, the attention economy, pick your buzzword. But if you just think about a Londoner's day,
Mm.
you get up in the morning, you probably look at your phone before you talk to your family because that's life in 2025. But you maybe turn on the radio or ask Alexa for the news. You walk out on the street, you drop by the corner store to pick up some milk, you take your kid to school, you hop on the tube, you go to work. They thinking about all of those as touch points and all of those as partnerships. I mean, that is uh, hundreds, if not thousands, of communication avenues to a person before they've even stepped out of their home, much less by the time they're at the office, and many more by the time they get home. And the positive thing about working at the city level is that we are actually in a confined geographic space. Like it's not, I don't need to worry about every global partnership and every global channel. But I know where all the Londoners are. They are definitionally within London. Um, so thinking about those partnerships that can get people as they are and talk to people and, engage them as they are making those steps from their front door to their office to the tube, that sort of thing. And that again, sort of starting from that audience insight and knowing about Londoners and where they are and what they do and what they listen to, working up from that to think, okay, so who can we be using to talk to people? And one of the strengths of uh, not just being in the public sector, but being in the public sector and working on a brand like London is that there's no shortage of partners. People want to be involved in London. Londoners love London. The businesses in London love London. The partners in London love London. So, in a weird way, it's almost a matter of our sort of like finite resource and capacity to get the right people. But the partnerships we need are not just conventional media owners or even unconventional media owners, but we work closely with the NHS, with libraries, with schools, with obviously with TfL and with the Metropolitan Police. We work with developers. We work with um, every civil society organization in London, I believe, has some sort of connection to the GLA, whether that's grant funding, whether that's support, whether that's just knowing one another. So, we work with faith leaders, but it's really understanding, you know, starting with an audience that is Londoners, all those different layers and means of connecting to them after that point. So, no partner is really off the table, but there are so many to choose from. It can be almost overwhelming at times.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I really like this concept of the Londoner's journey, no? And, like identifying the different touch points as you define them, right? Of like when we can intervene in what moment and segment of that specific target that we need for that campaign. I think that's very interesting and makes this work that sometimes is we can get very theoretical, very human, and that's how it should be. So I mean, it was nice to hear. You just mentioned, you hinted at, the media landscape in 2025, and we are all on our phones, social media, and so on and so forth. So my last question, before the very, very last, will be how a city like London, and specifically London Authority, the Greater London Authority's communication team, is dealing with innovation, innovation in communication, in media. If you can share some insights about how you're coping and how the civic communication landscape is changing for you.
I have so many opinions. How long do we have? Let me rattle through a few. How about that? So I think there's the how level. How we communicate, I think, is obviously a huge topic of concern or challenge or opportunity to many people. The advent of AI, how people use that to develop and tailor and transmit messages is of course a huge thing. Um, Beyond that, there's talking about that media ecosystem. We Everything seems to be changing right now. Traditional media channels, be they broadcast, or even, the stalwart social media channels like Facebook and Twitter, those don't really, I mean, they don't even exist anymore. Now it's Meta and X, but our relationship with them has changed. Their reach has changed. And not to mention, in many cases, their reliability. And then um, the London's gone through a really interesting shift around our local media landscape. We Some of our local newspapers have changed, and now there's sort of a proliferation of newsletters, which are really tailored local news, which is brilliant. Um, but obviously, sign of a wildly changing climate and how we get news and who we get it from. And then all of that sort of ladders up into the way that people trust media, they trust or how they trust government anymore, and who they want to hear their news from, who they want to get their public information from, and who they trust in that space. And even going back to your point about those layers of government, there are certain messages that people will trust more from national government or want to hear that this is a national level campaign, this is something that's happening at scale, and they want that authority. There's some messages that people want to hear from their most local government. I want to know what my local councillor is doing about this particular problem, whether it's a development on my street or a nightclub that's opening or closing, that sort of thing. And then there's that middle level, which is where and when do people want to hear from their city? And I am a big believer that in the point that I think the city is probably the largest largest meaningful level of geopolitical identity anymore. I think national identity is now so fragmented, and so difficult to define that it almost has lost its use as uh, a set of values or a set of messengers. But I think people still identify as a member of their city. And that means we can use that as a trusted messenger at key points and in key ways. And apologies, this is really just going on, but I think that leads into one of those other huge challenges and innovations that we're facing, which is misinformation and disinformation, and how you protect people against that at the civic level. Um, so yes, innovation in how we communicate, why we communicate, the messengers that we use, the how we deal with a crisis of trust, and then also how we use communications to bolster against, for lack of a better term, hostile communications, and divisive ones. And it is a genuinely fascinating time in stratcoms, and I think cities particularly are going to be on the front line of all of those changes because of that connection we have with our citizens.
Totally. And I mean, you combine a bit the two words, right? I mean, the corporate and the public now with your new role here. in London. And as you have just described, like the media landscape is changing so fast. How much adaptable is the system, to cope with these new changes? Um, I think London, once again, I mean, is known to be super innovative compared to, other cities, I mean, the UK in general, super developed in terms of, strategic communications, and they have always proved to be, very ahead of the curve. What's your experience in that? Because I mean, here we are discussing that like in 6 months you need to completely change your strategy because the social media is not relevant anymore. So how do you find adapting that process?
I first, thank you. I think we're great too. But I, I
I
think
think you
we
are.
have a few. I think one of the things that we do very well, and that I would urge everyone else to do the same, is invest very heavily in owned channels and
Mm.
uh, new partnerships. The first is because everything is changing at any given moment. TikTok is up, TikTok is down. Local news is in, local news is out. That we you can't rely purely on external media providers anymore to communicate with your audiences. What you can do, and what we are fortunate to have been doing for a long time and will be continuing to do, is invest in your own channels. So people will always know that there are ways that they can hear from their city that are not reliant on anyone else, whether that is the website, whether that is our own mailing list, whether that is our own um, our own avenues of speaking to Londoners. And I think that's more important now than ever before. And there's just too much volatility in the media market to rely entirely on other people to deliver your message for you. That said, um, finding, understanding that um, people trust new and different types of messengers and building those relationships um, authentically and early and um, I suppose thoroughly. But we invest a lot of time and insight into finding who are the and I'm going to use the word influencers, but what I'm not talking about are like major TikTokers sort of thing. What I'm talking about, who are the community leaders, who are the voices that people want to hear from on an issue, whether that is their teacher or their basketball coach, or a TikToker with 1 million followers. But again, just taking that step back and thinking, who do your audiences trust? Who do they actually want to hear from? Who do Londoners trust and want to hear from on a particular issue? And I'm constantly and continuously looking for new people in that space. And that's been that sort of landscape mapping, and that sort of outreach program, and that genuine engagement, because it can't be purely in sort of an extractive relationship. It needs to be genuine engagement with these partners. That's been a real push for us. Again, understanding that is perhaps the future of media is going to be much more personal, unconventional sources of news and information.
Interesting to see. Interesting to stay put and see how it's going to develop anyway. Anyway, it's gonna change very fast, so we will know soon.
Very, very true.
Um, before we wrap up, I have the last question that I always ask in our interviewees, which is if you have recommendations for our listeners and viewers about books, podcasts, videos, whatever material you find relevant for the discussion we have just had, just for them in case they want to complement the listening of this podcast.
I- If I'm looking around, I'm surrounded by books. I'm like, quick, find some that are leaping out to me. How about a couple book recommendations? I think Jon Yates's Fractured is a really good way of looking at how people the trust environment and how people are really where we are in the UK right now. It's harrowing, but I think it's really, really powerful. And it has some interesting ways forward. I am and this is a long separate conversation, but I sort of uh, I believe in sort of a cyclical nature of communication. So I really like very, very old communications textbooks because they are less predicated on particular media channels and more about the theory of comms. Um, so two that I do recommend all the time is the legitimately uh, I think controversial is not the right word, but interesting historical book by Edward Bernays, um, the Engineering of Consent. Um, and the essay and then the book, this is the father of public relations, and also um, one of the first to really bring communications into the public sphere and think about what the role of mass influence is, for better or for worse. And I think I think that's worth reading and thinking about both ethically and technically. And then in pure technique, there's a little slim book called Scientific Advertising, that David Ogilvy always cited as probably the best book written on communications, and it is almost it's almost like a tiny religious tract, but it's just a lot of almost bulleted points of like, write quickly, be clear, here's these things, and those fundamentals of communication are still true today in just how you make your messages clear, how you deliver directly, and how you think about your audience. And I think that's a really, really handy book, that's a quick read, and I think helps focus the mind as you tackle the role of comms in the public sphere.
Very interesting recommendations. Thanks a lot. Thanks for sharing your insights, your expertise with us. I mean, it was brilliant to hear. And yeah, I mean, goodbye. Have a good day.
Thank you so much for having me.
Bye.